think this is it. I'll just stop. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Gloria, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Education Committee in Nature Society. Thanks for joining us. Okay, I'll just introduce today's speaker. She's Dr. Kang Min. So she's she's basically a forest ecologist, and her research focuses on tropical trees, forest dynamics, carbon stock, and ecology. So her research sites include Bukit Timah Nature Reserve and Nature Reservoir, and she's also doing research on social perceptions of nature amongst urbanites. So in Nature Society, Dr. Ngo chairs the butterfly and insect group in NSS, looking at insects, and she's very enthusiastic about nature, of course. Okay, so let's hear from her today with on the talk on fun with forest trees and plants in Singapore.
Yeah, thanks, Gloria, and thank you everyone for joining me on this Boxing Day. First of all, Merry Christmas to everyone and Happy Boxing Day. Just to let you know, at the end of my talk, right, there will be a Kahoot quiz. So you might want to get your browser ready to join in later. So I'll send the instructions later. So Merry Christmas, and you know, when you see images of Christmas, right, you always see a plant, which is usually the Christmas tree. So I'll talk a bit more about the Christmas tree. So this is the original Christmas tree, right? It's called the Norway spruce, and it originates in the temperate climates. So you see it a lot in Europe, both Eastern and Western Europe, and also now in the US, Northern America. So the Norway spruce is a conifer, which I will talk more about later also. So you see that these Christmas trees usually have like these very thin needle-like leaves, which is very different from the plants we have. But the Christmas tree is, you know, it's all very nice. You use it for Christmas, but it is not so. It's in a bit of trouble now. You know, in some areas of Europe, you get you know, these areas where the Christmas tree is dying, and it's caused by this bark beetle. Okay, so this beetle goes into the bark of the Christmas tree, and it barrels, and then it digs holes into the bark, and then so this disrupts the you know, the water system and the food system of the plant, of the tree, and so this slowly kills the tree. And because beetles are you know, they can move around, so then they go to the next tree and the next tree. And so, you know, an entire area of forest could be could die from these beetles. So another thing I want to share with you about the Christmas tree is that it is a gymnosperm. Okay, may sound like a big word, but basically these gymnosperms are plants usually with needle-like leaves, and they always have naked seeds. So when we think about seeds, right, you think you know, the fruits that we eat is fleshy, right? And then inside the fruit, there's usually seeds. So if you can see my mouse where it's pointing, like for example, the tomato is actually a fruit, and you have these seeds here, and the fleshy bit is the fruit. Same for the apple. Okay, when you eat the flesh outside, then you get to the core, which is where the seeds are. But gymnosperms, they don't have seeds. Instead, they don't have fruits. They have cones. So for gymnosperms, the cones will have the seed, which is totally exposed. There's nothing covering the seed, which is why they're called naked seed plants. So here is a picture of a male cone and a female cone. Some gymnosperms, some conifers, will have just the male cones on one plant, and then all the female cones on one plant. Some conifers have both the male and female on the same tree. So these trees that I talked about, they're all not found in tropical regions like Singapore. Okay, you only find them in northern or very southern regions. So actually, do we have similar Christmas trees in Singapore? And the answer is yes, we do. One prominent example is the cook pine, but this is actually not a pine. Okay, this is the scientific name, and you actually see them around in Singapore, especially in some HDB estates. It's been planted and in some parks, for example, Kent Ridge Park. Okay, so this is a gymnosperm. Okay, it has kind of like needle-like leaves, but a little bit broader than the Norway spruce. And you can see that it has this Christmas tree structure, right? It grows just like a Christmas tree. And another thing is, unfortunately, right, if you remember some months ago, there was this lady who was crushed by a tree that fell on her. This was the species, but this species usually it is very strong, and so yeah, that was just a very freak accident. So as we go from needle leaves, we come to more broad-leaved plants, which is what we see in Singapore mostly. So we do have this broad-leaved gymnosperm, and it's called the belinjal. And I'm sure most of you would have eaten it. This is kind of like keropok, but it leaves a bitter aftertaste when you eat it. So this this belinjal, right? The snack comes from this tree. Okay, it's called I forgot to put the scientific name here, Natum nemon. And you also find this in some HDB estates and in some of the parks in Singapore. Okay, so we fry the seed. Okay, this is it's showing a naked seed here. Okay, because it's also a gymnosperm. Okay. So as we go from Christmas tree to the tropics, you'll find more and more broad-leaved plants, because in our climate, we have lots of sun, lots of water, okay, lots of rain, and so there's no need for leaves to be needle-like, because leaves when you have small leaves, it means that you want to conserve water. Okay, so think of a cactus. The cactus also have needle-like leaves because they grow in deserts. Deserts are very, very dry environments. So in Singapore, we have mostly broad-leaved plants, as you can see from a picture of this forest on the left. Almost all the plants here are broad-leaved. So how many species of plants do we have in Singapore? This, I took it from a street near my house. There's quite a few species you can see from this picture, but in total in Singapore, we have more than 4,000 species, plant species. Okay, that's really a lot. And of these 4,000 over species, a bit more than 2,000 of them are native species, and 1,800 of them are non-native species. So native species are species that originated from Singapore or the region. Okay, and non-native species are species that were brought around purposely, either by humans, artificially. So a lot of these non-native species came in when the British opened up Singapore and made this a trading hub, right? A lot of non-native species were brought in and out of Singapore. So actually, if you look on our streets of Singapore, most of those trees that you see, most of them are non-native species. There are many more of them on the streets. So for example, which I will show later, I think almost all the trees here that you see in this picture are non-native. So some of the very, very common street trees we have, this is called the rain tree. Why is it called rain tree? Because the leaves of the rain tree will close just before it rains. And in Malay, it's called the pokok pukul 5, which means the 5 o'clock tree. So why is it 5 o'clock? Because just like the effect of the rain, right? At about 5 p.m., the leaves of this tree will also start to close. And you will see this also if you take a double-decker bus and you happen to pass by a rain tree at about 5 p.m. or just before the rain, you'll find that their leaves are closed. And they have very showy pink flowers here. Okay, sometimes they drop, and when the seed pods ripen, this is still green. When they ripen, it becomes black, and you'll probably see them a lot, littered, the black pods littered on the floor when they drop down. So this rain tree is really, I think it's the most common street tree in Singapore, because the way it grows, it's not very tall, so it's short, but it spreads out to cover a big area. So it is very good as a shade tree. Another common street tree is what I call the kaya tree, just taking from the genus name. It's also called the Senegal mahogany. Senegal is a place in Africa. So this is also a non-native because it came from Africa. And you can see the trunk can be a very, very big tree. Okay, the trunk can be more than 1 meter in diameter. I think this is the second most common street tree in Singapore after the rain tree. You can recognize it from this very kind of light brown bark, and sometimes you will see these new leaves, sprouts coming out from the trunk. And usually you will find that the main trunks right at the top, they are almost like pointing up vertically with just a few degrees off the vertical. So that's a kaya tree.
I saw a rain tree on a double-decker bus right before the rain, and the leaves were closed. Some were still closing.
That's great. Is that Marcus?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's good. A very, very good observation you saw, and then you remembered it. Okay. So that was the rain tree. Okay. Now we go from streets to forests, right? So that's where our native species are. Okay, they're mostly in the forest. So this picture shows Bukit Timah Nature Reserve from the air, and in the background is the Macritchie Reservoir. Okay, so this big water feature in the foreground is the Hindhead Quarry. Okay, and these are the telecoms tower owned by Singtel. So it's in this picture, most of the trees here are our native trees. That means they originated from Singapore and in the region. So where are our forests? Here is a map of Singapore, and you will see that there's two big patches, actually maybe 4 big patches, okay, if you include the 2 offshore islands, Pulau Ubin and Pulau Tekong. But on the mainland, the biggest patch of green, there's one in the Central Nature Reserve, which includes all your reservoirs in the center, the Pierce Reservoir, the Seletar Reservoirs, and the Macritchie Reservoir, and Bukit Timah. And you have the western catchment, which is mostly army military training grounds, and also some farms and the Sungai Buloh wetland reserve at the north side. So you see from this map, we don't actually have a lot of forests left. Okay, so if you go back more than 200 years ago, before the British came, most of Singapore would have been all green. And now we only have these few big patches of green left in Singapore. So some terminology I want to go through before we talk about, I show you some results from my research. So we need to understand what is the difference between a primary forest and secondary forest. So primary forest, meaning primal forest, is forest that has never been cut by humans. Okay, and it usually has higher diversity, meaning more species of plants and animals and fungus. And also it usually has higher carbon stock. So carbon is this element that's very talked about in these days. You know, when you talk about climate change, it's about how much carbon dioxide you have in the atmosphere, and trees actually help us to absorb carbon dioxide and store them in their trunks. So the more trees we have, the better it is for our environment, because the trees are going to suck in all the carbon dioxide and help us to mitigate the, you know, climate change.
Actually, we grew some plants outside in the garden. No, not the garden, but the balcony.
Okay, so plants, not all plants store carbon. Okay, so it has to be trees, because trees have the highest ratio of carbon to other plant structures, because trees have wood, and it's the wood that stores the most carbon if you talk about plants in general. And it's not just any tree, right? You want big trees, tall trees, but big and tall trees take time to grow. Okay, so let's move on. So that was primary forest. Okay, so secondary forest, on the other hand, is forest that has been cut by humans at least once. It usually has lower diversity than primary forest. Doesn't mean it has low absolute diversity. Usually has also lower carbon stock than the primary forest. So the bottom two pictures on the left show some, you know, snippets of primary forest. Actually, the one on the left shows Bukit Timah, but from a ground level. And there is only two places in the world that you can access a tropical forest so easily. Primary forest. Okay, one is São Paulo in Brazil, and the other is Bukit Timah in Singapore. So Bukit Timah is very precious. And the picture on the right shows the understory of a secondary forest, so a bit sparse, and that's why it has lower diversity and lower carbon stock, okay, than primary forest. Yes, so primary forest, so if you look at this map, right, primary forest, in look at the legend, is the darkest green. And if you match the color on the legend to the map, you will find that we have the biggest patch of continuous primary forest, right, in Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, and that's why it's so precious. You also have smaller patches of primary forest in MacRitchie and generally in the Central Nature Reserve, but they are all very fragmented. So most forest in Singapore is actually secondary forest. It can be older secondary forest or younger secondary forests. Primary forest in Singapore is now 0.2% of the original cover, you know, compared to more than 200 years ago. So our long-term research on forests in Singapore is based in Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, which has the biggest continuous primary forest left in Singapore. And so we set up these long-term forest plots to monitor trees and to do research on them. Okay, so what you're seeing on the left is a map of Bukit Timah, and the contour lines are showing the elevation. And in case you didn't know, Bukit Timah is the highest natural point in Singapore at 163 meters. You know, right now we have a lot of buildings that are much taller than Bukit Timah, but Bukit Timah has the tallest natural point. And the picture on the right shows our research plots. So the one on the left, this rectangle on the left, is the primary forest plot. Okay, every dot in these two rectangles represents one tree. Okay, so we are monitoring about 12,000 trees in the primary forest plot, which is the rectangle on the left. And the rectangle on the right is mostly secondary forest. Okay, so the area on the bottom right of this picture is all secondary forest. And one look at this map, you can tell that immediately that the secondary forest has so much fewer trees. It's less dense. And so actually, if you go to Bukit Timah and you go on the main road, then if like about halfway, not past halfway to the summit, right? You look on the right side, there will be a path called the catchment path. And this is the catchment path actually, this gap here. You can see that in the primary forest plot, right? When we map the trees, the catchment path shows up very clearly because there's this long line with no trees. And that's the public path. If you take the catchment path all the way from the main road and you go finish up to catchment path, right, you will hit the bicycle trail and the pipeline, which is on the eastern side of Bukit Timah. Okay, so we have been doing this research. We have been studying these trees for the last 20 over years. Okay, so that's really long-term research. But 20 over years in the lifespan of a tree is actually still very short. Okay, even though it's like about 1/4 of a human lifespan, you know, because some of these trees live for hundreds of years. So some of these trees would have witnessed, you know, our 2 world wars, and even before Raffles came, they would have been standing there. Okay, so what did we find from our research? So in this 2 hectares, this the rectangle on the left. So these 2 rectangles are 2 hectares each. 2 hectares is 200 meters by 100 meters. Okay, it's just a pretty small area. So in 2 hectares of Bukit Timah, there are more than 350 tree species. This is a lot of species. You know, this is just the trees, and this is not counting the lianas. This is not counting the ferns, not counting the other kinds of plants, the shrubs, the ground herbs. So we have a lot of species still in Singapore. And you compare to temperate forests, okay, where you find the Christmas trees. In a bigger area of forest, they have only 24 species. This is in the UK. And then in the US, in a 25.6 hectares of forest in the Yosemite, which is a place in western US, they have only 14 species of trees. So compared to us, we have in a small area of forest more than 350 species. You know, this is a very rich level of diversity that we need to protect. And I'm showing this picture on the right of me and another assistant trying to get leaves from this big tree. Okay, so this big tree is, the Malay name is called the Seraya. It may be familiar to some of you. There's a road called Seraya Crescent along Upper Thomson Road. Okay, so this is Shorea curtisii, the most common canopy tree at Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. Very majestic. Okay, if you see from the outside or you see from aerial photos, the crown is very silvery. You know, it kind of glows. Okay, it's a special tree. Another common species in the primary forest is this tree called Tampines. Okay, it might sound familiar to you because the HDB town in the east, Tampines, is named after this tree. Okay, the scientific name is Drapelus elongatus. In our primary forest plot, we are monitoring more than 1,000 of these trees, so it's pretty common in primary forests. And also you find it in Macritchie, a lot of them near the Tampines Hut. Other things we found, so this is aerial photograph of Bukit Timah Nature Reserve, okay, and you can see my mouse, right? So this whole big area on the north side of Bukit Timah used to be a dairy farm. There used to be cows here, grazing on the pasture, and that's why this place is called Dairy Farm today. And if you look at our study site, which is towards the southeast, this whole area also used to be kampong. We believe that it used to be pineapple plantations or some other kind of plantation. Okay, so this whole place was used to be all bare. And now, if you look at a map on Google Maps, and you turn on the satellite mode, you'll see that the whole of Bukit Timah is all green, including the old dairy farm. Okay, now the old dairy farm is now all filled with trees. Okay, and this old kampong also is now covered with trees. But from our studies in the secondary forest plot, these trees, even though they grew, it still takes a long time for them to recover, even though there's primary forest right, in the core of Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. And from our current research that we are, current data that we are analyzing, we think that it will take at least more than 500 years or even more than 1,000 years for these old kampong and the old dairy farm to return to primary forest. Which means that the moment you lose your primary forest, it takes centuries or millennia to get back that primary forest, which is a long time. Okay, this is a common species in secondary forests. Okay, this is called Tembusu. Okay, it may sound very familiar because a lot of companies and groups use the name Tembusu. It's also called the $5 note tree because it's featured on our $5 note. Okay, so it's called Cytophyllum fragrans. Fragrance comes from the fragrant flowers, when it flowers. This species flowers once a year. The other way you can use to identify the Tembusu is to look at the bark. Okay, very rough, very deeply fissured in this kind of manner. You will find this tree, actually this $5 note tree, right, is taken from the Botanic Gardens. It has this characteristic, very low hanging branch. But I think now it has been fenced off. But you also find a lot of Tembusu in our secondary forest. It's been planted at MacRitchie Park, right near the reservoir. Yeah, you will find this bark of the tree. Those are very big trees also. So I showed the difference between primary forests and secondary forests. And I said that secondary forest has less diversity, less carbon, but is it any less important? Actually, no, because successional forest or secondary forest is actually the middle point between old growth forest or primary forest and other kinds of land use like urban centers, or if we were not living in Singapore, we live in Malaysia or Indonesia, they have a lot of plantations, they have crops, they have pastures. And in order for these pastures to go to old growth forests or primary forests, they need to pass through a phase of secondary forest. Okay, and this process actually takes a long time. It can be decades or centuries. Right now in Singapore, we have a lot of secondary forests. Okay, much more so than primary forests. So just by virtue of their extent in Singapore, secondary forests are still very important to us. So some examples of secondary forests. These are the parks that are under NParks jurisdiction. Okay, the Windsor Nature Park on the left and the Chestnut Nature Park on the right. But there are also some unprotected secondary forests. For example, Clementi Forest on the left. We saw last year that this is still a very valuable forest. There were some previously thought to be extinct species of orchids that were rediscovered in Clementi Forest. And also Bukit Brown on the right. It's still a cemetery, but it's still being threatened by roads and urban development. Okay, Bukit Brown is also a very beautiful secondary forest. So just to end off, Singapore still has a lot of diversity despite 2 centuries of logging and disturbances, right? When Singapore got opened up as a port, a lot of immigrants came and then they started to clear land. And so most of the forest loss in Singapore resulted during that period. But those areas that were not cut still have a lot of diversity, and these are areas that we should protect, especially the primary forest areas like Bukit Timah and the Macritchie and the Central Nature Reserve. Okay, so once primary forests are removed, it takes a very long time for them to grow back. So it's better that we keep them as they are. Okay, rather than cut them and then plant them back again. Because even if you plant them, they're gonna take decades and centuries to grow back to the original size. And our secondary forests are still very valuable as buffers. So buffers meaning they surround the primary forest to make sure that the primary forest doesn't get shocked by sudden changes in the environment. So Bukit Timah, has secondary forests all around the core area of the primary forest. So these secondary forests are still valuable. And because secondary forests, there are so much of them, they are also important as carbon sinks and biodiversity banks, just like we saw how some species were rediscovered in Clementi forests. Okay, so it's time for some fun. I'll go to my Kahoot page. I will take your questions after the Kahoot quiz. Let me share screen again. Okay, can you all see the Kahoot page? If you can, feel free to, if you're on a computer, you open up another tab on your browser, and then you type in kahoot.it and type in the game pin and join the game. If you have the Kahoot app on your phone, you can also join from the app.
Actually, you are using iPad.
Okay, you can open the Safari app on iPad and type in the address. Okay, how many participants are we expecting?
Give the iPad to my mother first.
Okay, Marcus and Karina, are you okay to join the Kahoot?
Okay, guys, can y'all, if you join, and we will actually have prizes. So the top 3 winners will get the
Yeah,
the Butterfly
I forgot
Insect
that.
is currently producing a guide book, but then it's not ready yet. So we will collate the winners, and then when it's ready, we will mail the guide to the winners. So please join in, okay? And let's have some fun.
So yeah, so this guide that we're giving away is actually the butterfly guide.
Yes, butterfly guide, featuring 200 over species of butterflies. Yeah.
Yes, it's revised from the current version, and we're adding in like 30 or 40% more species. Yeah, I think I want to wait for Marcus and Karina because they were so active.
Marcus and Karina, are y'all coming to join us?
No, cannot.
You're not, is it? Okay, now
Cannot,
I think it's difficult for them to, because they're probably doing iPad, difficult to switch screens maybe.
Okay, then you just watch, okay.
Okay.
Okay, so we got one more person joining in. Now we have 12 people, 12 participants. I think, shall we just start?
Yeah. Yes, please, come.
Oh, Josh.
People.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna start. Once I start, you cannot join already. Okay, let's start. Wow. Okay, 5 questions. Gymnosperms are plants with... Let me turn on the music. Okay, 11 answers. Okay, most people got it correct because I mentioned gymnosperms are plants with naked seeds, right? So gymnosperms will not have ovaries or fruits or flowers. Okay, next. Who got the highest? Okay, Alia and Dinah. Next. What are non-native species? There can be more than one correct answer. Okay, let's see who got it. Okay, yeah, most people got the 2 answers right. So non-native species are species that came from outside of Singapore, right? And they were brought into Singapore. Okay. So let's go to the next one. Oh, Hang Chong, top scorer. Okay. Primary forest is forest that has never been cut before, true or false? Yay, most people got it correct. So primary forest is primal forest, or forest that has never been cut. Okay, let's see who got the highest this time. Oh, still Hang Chong. Okay, let's go to the 4th question. Singapore has more primary forests than secondary forests. True or false? Yay! Okay, so most people got it correct. Singapore has more secondary forests than primary forests. Okay, the last question will determine who gets the butterfly guides. Oh, Cool family has moved up. Which of these green spaces are not protected by law? I think I didn't mention this, but if you know our green spaces well enough, you should know the answer. Yay, very good. Most people got it right. Clementi Forest is not officially protected by law. Okay, let's see. Yay, waiting. Yay, dash. And Hang Chong is first place. Okay, so 3 of you can contact Gloria to get your guide when it's out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll stop share here.
Okay. Thanks, Kang Min, for the very interesting talk. Short and brief, but it gives the gist. Okay. So everybody, you all can type in your questions now, and I will read them out for Kang Min to answer. So we have the first question from Kiran. What and how old is the oldest tree in Singapore, and where is it located?
It's very hard to tell the age of trees in tropical trees because if you look at temperate trees, right, you cut the tree and then you can see the tree rings. Those tree rings are because they are there because these trees are growing in different seasons. So they have a growing season and then they have a dormant season. So these 2 seasons, they alternate between each other every year. And because the growth rate is different, the color of the ring, the rings are formed because of difference in color between the 2 different growth periods. In Singapore and in tropics mostly, we don't have growing seasons. Every day is a growing season. And so we don't have tree rings, and so it's very hard to tell the age of the trees. But if I were to guess, some of the biggest trees in Bukit Timah are more than 1,000 years. I'm very sure of that. Yeah.
1,000 years old, wow.
More than that.
What species would that be?
It will be species, the very long-lived, the primary forest species like the seraya, okay, Shorea curtisii, maybe even the kumpasia, the kumpas tree, which is a bean family. Yeah.
And how big is the girth of such a tree, a seraya?
Seraya can be more than 1 meter. Diameter. If it's girth, then it's 300, more than 300 mm, or 3 meters.
Oh, what is the difference between the diameter and the girth?
Okay, the girth is the circumference. Okay, when you measure a tree, right? Yeah, you are putting a tape around the tree. What we use, the tool that we use is called a diameter tape, which directly gives us a diameter, so we don't need to divide by pi. Yeah.
Okay, so there's another question. What are some trees that are resistant to white ants, to termites?
So, if you know some of the very good quality wood, right? So one of them is teak, the other one is chengao. Some people say that chengao is what gave rise to our place name called Changi. So we might used to have these chengao trees. These are very their wood is very hard, so they are very popular for making furniture or even houses. So if you want wood that is very tough against termites, you want to go for those very slow growing trees. There's also the Bornean ironwood, which is also very tough wood. But the downside is that these kinds of trees take very, very long time to grow because the trees are taking in the resources and they are putting the resources into their wood, making it very strong. And they take a very long time to grow.
One time when I went to school, there was a tree that fell on the car. How there were white and trees that are sick and they might fall over.
Yeah, so if the trees are growing on the streets, then ant parks will have officers going to check the trees once every 6 months or once a year. They will check whether there's fungus growing on the tree. So if there's fungus, then they can cut the branches or they cut the whole tree and then they grow a new one again. Ken?
Okay.
Okay, so what are the main dangers to our remaining primary forest patches?
The main dangers, well, if there are no development plans on them, then the main dangers are climate change. Because as the temperatures go up, as our droughts, as extreme weather conditions get even more extreme, then once trees pass some kind of tipping point or breaking point, right, then they die, right? So as these extreme conditions happen more frequently, then we'll get more like higher turnover of these trees. So climate change is the biggest threat to primary forests in Singapore.
So is just to follow up on that, is there any way that I know it's difficult, aside from cutting carbon and all that, or is there any way like ant parks can do to help these trees, like maybe watering them more frequently or something like that? Is there any human assisted methods?
I think the primary forest, based on our research, is quite resilient. No need to water because it's a very big area to water. So what is more important is to really enhance this current secondary forest. Do planting at the secondary forest, do strategic planting, and don't just plant any species anywhere. Yeah.
Okay, so it leads on to, I have a question on my own. Just now you mentioned about assisted regeneration, right? Like you said, planting strategically the perpetuates that are native to our shores. So if that's the case, how long does it take to revert to primary forests, given if you embark on assisted regeneration?
I mean, I can't tell you how long exactly, like how many years, but we have been doing, ant parks has been doing reforestation for the last few decades. And really, it's not just about planting trees, right? You can plant trees and it will be like a plantation, but you also need to give time for the forest to grow the understory, to have the lianas and everything. So the forest is not just about planting trees. You also need to have these understory vegetation, and also the animals need to come in to make it a proper forest. Yeah.
Okay. So how does the lianas help? I mean, in terms of undergrowth, how does it help in this regeneration process?
It doesn't really help, but it adds to the diversity, because if you go to a primary forest, you see lianas in most places. So if you have just trees without lianas and without anything else, then it's just a plantation.
Understand. Okay. So Hanja is asking, how best can we protect our remaining primary forest patches?
Just be sensitive when you walk through the trails. I go to Bukit Timah very often, and it has this old uncles. They blast their music or they shout, and it disturbs the animals. And some of them even go off trail. They go to the closed trails. So the best way is just to stay on the public trails and observe the things around you, observe the plants, observe the animals, and don't make noise, don't litter. And that's it. Don't go off trail.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we differentiate between native and non-native species? Are there any characteristics, telltale signs?
Native and non-native, you need to really study the vegetation of Singapore to know. There are so many species, like a few thousand species. There's no physical characteristic to say this one is non-native, this one is non-native. You need to learn it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I have a question. Can I ask?
Sure.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, Kang Min, yesterday I went for a walk. I was looking for the Eucalyptus tree, which is it's very beautiful, right? The Mindanao gum tree, which is also called the rainbow tree at Patong Park. It amazes me because the colorful bark throughout the tree. I only knew trees can come out either brown or green, but how come rainbow? Why? How does it work?
Yeah, this one is probably not native. So I'm gonna guess. I don't know eucalyptus so much, but these are chemicals, because eucalyptus has a lot of chemicals. That's why we use them to make our feng yu, the minty, the herbal oils, right? So eucalyptus generally have a lot of chemicals in them, and probably some of it went into the bark, and it shows up as different colors when they flick off.
Yeah. So they are not naturally bred, but they have been infused chemically to grow?
No, these chemicals are produced by the plant naturally.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Understand. Yeah. Thank you.
It's natural.
Beautiful, very beautiful tree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another question. What makes a tree species invasive?
Okay, invasive is another topic altogether. Okay, there's been a whole field of research that deals with invasive species. And different people, different organizations have different definitions of invasiveness. But to be invasive is to go into an ecosystem and overtake or overrun the original ecosystem. In Singapore, there are some researchers who would say that albizia are invasive, or some other, what we call the pioneer species, trees that need a lot of light. They might brand them as invasive, but to me, if they don't enter the primary forest, they don't take over our primary forest, then they are not really so invasive. So, for example, you see a lot of albizia trees, right, on the edge of Bukit Timah. All dairy farm is full of albizia, but they stop where there are primary forest trees, because in a primary forest it's so dark. Albizia like to have a lot of light, otherwise they cannot grow, and that's why these non-native species are not really entering the primary forest, and I wouldn't consider them invasive. Yeah.
So any more questions, anybody? Can you all type it? I just give another 5 minutes. Okay, coming about the assisted regeneration, right?
Okay.
So basically, if you are talking about not just having plantations, but having actual, is there a way to like plant lianas to help them, like seed them first to see if they can grow, and you know what I mean, planting the understory rather than just having it, letting it occur naturally?
Yeah, I'm not sure if this has been tried before. Even like overseas projects that I know, they mostly just plant the trees and then they let nature take over,
Oh, okay.
let the animals disperse the seeds on their own. But yeah, planting lianas could be something that we could consider if we want to speed up the regeneration process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then do forest ecologists work together with maybe the authorities or to rewild the environment? Do you believe in that course of action?
Yeah,
In
of
terms
course.
of
I mean, yeah, I'm a scientist myself, and
yeah, of course.
is I would like to work with them. It's just yeah, how receptive they are to us.
Okay. Good.
It has been because they also work on a tight schedule. You know, they want to plant 1 million trees in the next now it's 8 years now, and so they're kind of on a tight schedule. Sometimes they rush it and then they plant unsuitable species at the unsuitable sites. So
What
yeah,
will make it unsuitable? I mean, what is the definition of that?
at least for to the places that I am frequenting, you know, they plant some of the primary forest species on the very open areas on
Okay,
the
the
rail
conditions
corridor.
are not really okay.
Yes, so that was a mismatch, right? So
Oh,
of course there'll be some trees that survive, but there are others who died that died, right? So these resources could have been better used, could have been better managed with more time.
okay.
Yeah.
So just now you mentioned about the importance of having buffer secondary forests to provide. That means in that sense, is it to do with like humidity, to keep it moist so that the primary core is moist enough for the primary forest trees to grow well?
That's one. So humidity is very important, and
Okay.
also to keep the animals full, right? Because not the primary forest trees are not fruiting all the time, but they're also still very important to the forest. So, but you have these secondary forest species like the figs, you know, some other species in the secondary forest that are feeding these animals the whole time. So this is a way to keep the ecosystem alive. You know, so these secondary forests are really important in that way.
Okay. Okay, Han Chong has another question. Is the recruitment or regeneration rate of native hardwoods higher than the loss?
It is so the forest right now we are finding even today it is self regenerating. So there's no net loss, but also no very little net gain. Even though there's the you know the seeds from primary forest could easily go to secondary forest, but we are finding that they are they're spreading very slowly. So the kampong that I was saying that was abandoned in the 1950s, right, in our study plot, was abandoned in the 1950s, and now you see those trees, so that's secondary forest, but then most of the primary forest species are not there yet. Yeah, so it's been 70 years already, you know, and they are not there yet.
But
Yeah.
are the saplings growing but not growing well, or are they totally absent? The
They are
saplings?
growing. It's just that they grow slowly, you know, because
Slowly.
they
Oh,
are primary forest species. Yeah.
okay. Okay. So that means there is some disposal, but they are not trees yet in that sense.
The dispersal is very short, so they are not flying like a few
Yeah.
100 meters. You know, they are just going 10 meters, 20 meters.
Oh,
And
okay.
each tree takes, you know, decades to grow, and then you want to wait for that tree to grow into an adult, then it produces new seeds, then you go another 10-20 meters, right? So it's a very slow process.
Okay. But I suppose because it's your study plot, you are not like helping assisting it because you are seeing how nature takes its course. Is that the reason?
Yeah, so for the study plots, it's a long-term research plot. We don't want to do any
Understand.
interference on it. So
Okay.
from our research, we want to recommend to NParks, you know, what are the steps to take in other secondary forests.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot for the talk, Kang Min. It was really insightful. Yeah. And thanks everybody for attending. Okay.
Oh,
Merry
thank
Christmas
you.
to all. Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
Gloria and
Bye-bye.
everyone. Yeah.
Coming.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcus and Karina.
Bye.
Thank you, coming.
Okay,
Thanks,
bye.
Ancho.
Bye, Chong.
Happy Boxing Day.
Yes.
Thank
Happy
you. Thank
Boxing
you.
Day to
You
you
too.
too.